The views and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited.
Welcome to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with the panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound. Today, our panel will be answering listener emails, and we have a question from Tara, who lives in Biloxi, Mississippi, and Tara asks, so, crooked Joe Biden has pardoned his druggy son, that would be Hunter Biden. Does this change the panel's mind about how crooked the entire Democratic Party is? Or are you liberals, that would be we three, I believe, liberals, going to explain this away? If I might make one point here before you two start. So to Tara, I wanted to say that as a parent, I don't know if you have children, certainly the father of such a child would want, any parent would want the child to be, given an opportunity. Hunter Biden apparently has been sober for a number of years. He owed back taxes, which he has paid, and he lied on a gun permit and said he did not have a drug addiction problem, so he obtained a firearm illegally. I don't know if he still has a firearm or not. That was the extent of his crimes. Those are the extent of his crimes. I believe he has already served time in prison. Kash Patel, who is being floated as the replacement for Christopher Wray as the director of the FBI, although Christopher Wray has 3 years remaining of his 10-year term, and Christopher Wray is Trump's original selection after Trump fired James Comey. Kash Patel had said that he would put Hunter Biden in prison for Hunter's lifetime, which seems an excessive sentence. Now, what a normal sentence would be for someone who is not the president of the United States, the person had committed the same crimes, I don't know. So I'm not clear whether you're concerned about Hunter's not being jailed for a longer period of time, whether Hunter should be imprisoned for his lifetime, whether you're concerned that Biden said he would not pardon Hunter and then he did. I would also like to point out that Jared Kushner's father, he violated a federal law, but he was prosecuted successfully by Chris Christie, who is also a Republican, and Kushner Sr. was pardoned by Donald Trump. So there are pardons that have been given to people who have been found guilty of crimes, including federal crimes, who are family members of presidents. And I don't remember there being a lot of outrage that Trump had pardoned his father-in-law. So I'm not sure what the distinction is between Biden's pardoning his only surviving son and Trump's pardoning his father-in-law and now making his father-in-law ambassador to France. So perhaps you might email further and explain, tell us more about what your concern actually is, and what would you both like to say?
So I'm not big on the pardon thing at all. I don't understand why the framers put this in the Constitution. I really don't. I've seen it not used well enough times to put this in this pardon of Hunter Biden in a long line of pardons that I wish had never happened, including Mark Rich, who Clinton pardoned on his last day in office, and as you said, Charles Kushner, and by the way, Trump pardoned a guy who was serving life without parole for killing a cop, and the guy's back in jail now. No need to worry. Those of you who live down in Florida, where the guy is from. But the guy actually set up a drug buy, not knowing, of course, that it was a cop that was arranging the buy and bust as part of a sting operation. And rather than go through with the drug buy, he sent one of his henchmen, handed him a gun, and sent him to kill the cop, which he did. And then the guy flipped on him, and he ended up getting convicted by a jury and spending life without parole in prison for killing this cop, this police officer. And Trump pardoned him as a favor to a friend of his daughter and son-in-law's, who happened to be the guy's attorney. And
I remember that.
And Trump did that in the last day. And I don't know why that wasn't made a big deal during the election. I honestly don't understand it. I've talked about it here before. You know, anybody who kills a policeman is a heinous human being who you would never want to see pardoned. And we've seen this time and time and time again, where presidents have not pardoned even cases that are ambiguous when it involves the killing of a police officer. But Trump did, and nobody's ever called him on it. And that is, to me, the most disgusting pardon of them all. I don't think that you can separate this decision to pardon Hunter Biden from the timing of it, which is clearly when Kash Patel was announced as the next FBI head, and he'll probably be that. The fact that there is no vacancy at the top of the FBI doesn't seem to trouble anybody. Trump is going to fire Chris Wray, who he hired when he fired James Comey before his time in office. And the whole idea of the 10 years is a post-Watergate thing. 10 years as FBI director was to be able to straddle different administrations to keep the job from being a partisan job. And clearly, James Comey, who was a Republican, was fired for the reason of him not issuing pardons or dropping cases against Mike Flynn and continuing to investigate the Russia that Trump likes to claim is fake, even though it isn't, and hire Chris Wray, who, you know, had a great background as a partisan Republican, you know, law dog type, and now wants to fire him because of what the FBI has done, presumably on January 6th, arresting people. Still, I believe on election day itself, people were being sentenced to jail for their activities on January 6, 2021. But Kash Patel is one of these people who I think, we'll talk about. I'll turn it over to Mark for comments on the Biden situation itself, but then hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about who this guy is and why he is so dangerous to the country as FBI director.
Yeah. Like you, Scott, I'm not a big fan of the pardon system. I too cannot figure out why they put that in there, especially when you think about when it was put in. I mean, it just seems, I don't know. I don't know who was trying to protect at the time. You always have to go back to the time that this was put in, and you have to say, okay, what was the purpose of it? And there's a lot of legal scholars look at and really can't come up with a legitimate answer for that. Now, we've also said on this podcast we got to stop. Democrats, if they're going to do anything, have got to stop being Boy Scouts. So first of all, let me say this is probably the stupidest question I've ever heard in my entire life. Number one, I am not a Democrat, and I'm not a liberal. I'm a down the middle moderate. And if you haven't been able to figure that out, then really there's nothing to be talked about. I do not agree with the pardoning of Hunter Biden. I think Joe Biden did it, again, possibly with the reasons that Scott has brought out. But the fact is that it's done and over with. It's within the power of the president to do it. Get over it. Put on your big boy panties. Get over it. You have a real problem with this Hunter Biden thing, and it amazes me. And we talked about this 3 years ago when we first started this. Hunter Biden's laptop, which must absolutely have the world's secrets sitting inside of it. I don't know if it's the world's secrets or more dick pics that people really want to see off of Hunter Biden's laptop. But the fact is that you don't have a problem with electing a 34-time convicted felon. That's okay. That is perfectly fine. And it's so hypocritical, absolutely hypocritical, to have a problem with a father pardoning his son. Okay, as Brooklyn brought out, Seems like a natural thing. I think it's a bad move for the Democrats. I think it's a horrible move for the Democrats. But you know what? Joe Biden's 80 some odd years old. I don't think he cares anymore. I think that this goes to a lot of maybe a little bit of animosity on his part for being basically pushed aside and putting Kamala Harris up to run. But then again, Joe, and again, I think Joe did a great job. But he did say when he first got elected, he was not going to run again. And he broke that promise. He decided he was going to run again. And it just created so much chaos. And you could say it's because Joe Biden was, mentally not there, whatever. But the fact is that we are where we're at. And you can sit and you can cry about Hunter Biden being pardoned when you look at the long list of people that have been pardoned by presidents that probably should have. Scott has pointed out just a few of them that have been pardoned. And I'm sure the Republicans are going to jump on this like, a dog on a new bone. Okay, fine. But I'm going to make the assumption, Biloxi, Mississippi, I'm going to make the assumption you voted for Trump. And that person being a convicted 34-time felon and liable for sexual assault, you have no problem with. But you have a real problem with Hunter Biden. I would have to say that you're not a serious person. You're part of the cult. And as far as I'm concerned, that's it with that one. That's my non-Boy Scout answer.
Okay. Hey, Biloxi, I'm all with you. Keep listening. Thanks. Keep listening. Thanks. Not a stupid question. It's a good question. I didn't care for the tone, but I may be reading into that. Yeah.
I have to admit, when I read that, I was like, you're out of your mind. I mean, if anybody that does know, I'm the one that goes through the emails and, kind of selects the questions. And sometimes one just gets there and it's like, yeah, okay. Let me tell you what I really think about all of this. But all right, let's talk a little bit about Kash Patel.
Yeah.
Which is a lot more fun than, Hunter Biden's laptop or dick pics. Although you never know.
So Charles Kupperman was actually his supervisor in the first Trump administration. And Charles Kupperman told the Wall Street Journal this week that Kash Patel is absolutely unqualified for the job and that he's untrustworthy. And it's an absolute disgrace to American citizens to even consider an individual of this nature for this position. Bill Barr, who is the Attorney General, who's on Kash Patel's shit list, Gina Haspel, the CIA director, went to great lengths during the first Trump administration to prevent him from getting any kind of senior intelligence or law enforcement roles. I think he ended up in the Pentagon as some kind of deputy secretary of defense or something along those lines, and actually tried to end our entire troop contingent in Afghanistan in January of 2021 before Joe Biden became president, and was stopped because William Esper caught wind of it somehow, saw this memo that said remove all troops from Afghanistan, and tracked it. It went to the White House and said, who ordered this? Nobody at the White House could say, said, I ordered it, or, nobody was taking responsibility for it. And then it turned out that it was Kash Patel acting probably on John McEntee's orders, who was Trump's main body guy at that time, whatever. And that he wanted to withdraw the rest of the 1,500 or whatever it was troops that were in Afghanistan, essentially leaving everybody who was there for diplomatic roles and all kinds of stuff unguarded as the Afghanistan was going to fall to pieces. So this is a guy who will do anything, say anything, go after anybody. He wrote a book, which is incredible in of itself. And in the index of that book is a list of people that he says that he will be going after. And in that book includes Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and John Podesta for some reason, Hillary Clinton, probably Bill Clinton's in there, a number of people, not Barack Obama, oddly, but a whole bunch of other people who he says are enemies of the state and need to be taken to Gitmo and executed or whatever it is that he sees doing with them. And he's a singularly dangerous person to have in a role that some of us, and probably not you, whoever wrote this, understands, like, can remember from John Edgar Hoover, right? From J. Edgar Hoover, that when I was growing up, the FBI was the bad guys. The FBI was investigating Muhammad Ali and John Lennon and Martin Luther King, and the FBI really had become, into the 70s, the bad guy, in late 60s, early 70s, the bad guys, after being the best law enforcement bureau in the world. And I think that, the ghost of Hoover hovers in Kash Patel, but probably not just Hoover. He's probably more like a Lavrentiy Beria, who was Stalin's right-hand man and had lists of people that he picked up every night during the Stalin time in the Soviet Union to go to prison, be executed right on the spot, et cetera, et cetera. And the FBI is way too powerful an organization to put in the hands of somebody like that.
The FBI is still, and we've mentioned this before, and I think that Brooklyn brought up a very good point the last time about how much the FBI really assists state government across the border as far as, with Canada and some of the rules that are there. The FBI is an important agency. And I too remembered the days of J. Edgar Hoover, who was in there for way too long and was almost a government of himself, hated the Kennedys when Kennedy was president, just absolutely hated them. And thankfully the FBI evolved beyond that single person vigilantism that we believe we saw. But in a lot of ways, J. Edgar Hoover, for really as terrible a human being as he was, still created a very effective police agency that works very, very well. It is a very effective police agency. And it is one of those organizations where Americans can look at it and be quite proud of. I mean, we can really look at it and say, wow, this is a globally respected group, even more so than, say, the CIA. I mean, because they're like law enforcement, where the CIA is more spycraft. So how many other countries have used? In fact, I was watching a movie the other day. It is called Citizen X. And it is about, and I can't remember the time frame of it, but it was, I believe, in the 70s or 80s. There was a serial killer in Russia, in the old Soviet Union. In fact, it was just before the old Soviet Union fell, so it probably more toward the late 80s. And they had a serial killer, and they wouldn't admit it because it was the Soviets, and the Soviets believed that communism does not have serial killers. But eventually they reached out to the FBI and those people in the FBI that were experts on serial killers. And they eventually caught this guy because of the assistance from the FBI. So putting somebody like Kash Patel into this position really does damage what the FBI is and what it could be. And I think, although so many people today on one side of the aisle, even actually on both sides of the aisle, it's just not one side, on both sides of the aisle, malign the FBI a lot. The fact is that, are you going to, out of all the agents, are you going to maybe have a bad apple or two? Yeah. Statistically, that's kind of the way it works. But the fact is that this is a great organization. It is a great law enforcement organization. It provides an almost unparalleled amount of assistance to state and local law enforcement and international law enforcement. And to lose that, or to have it be in some way diluted or because of ideology, would be a terrible shame, not only for the United States, but I think for many in the world. It is too important an agency, and we should basically stop maligning this very in my mind, a great law enforcement agency. And Kash Patel, absolutely out.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. And he's also written a children's book about King Trump and how he is the knight coming to save King Trump from Hillary Queenton and Adam Shifty or whatever, Adam Schiff, who is the bad guy. And this is a children's book.
I always wondered, do any of these things sell?
Yeah, apparently the children's book does. I don't know anything about the other one, except there's a list in the index of people who need to be, removed and put wherever. And Kash Patel is also the individual who was on Steve Bannon's War Room podcast, where Kash Patel was talking, I don't remember how long ago this was, but it was before Steve Bannon went to prison. Kash Patel was saying that people like, I believe it was like Hillary Clinton, needed to be put in the Washington, D.C. gulag. This was well before the election. It had to be at least a year ago, if not 2 years ago. And that remark was hastily disavowed. But he was not, Kash Patel, in my view, was not joking. His idea with the FBI is why do they need 7,000 or 8,000 people in the FBI, like in the main headquarters or whatever? They're all police officers. They should all be out policing. No, they're not all police officers. There's a lot of support staff doing a lot of other work, the administrative work. I mean, if he thinks that individuals like in the behavioral science unit and one of our former professors, adjunct professors, I think it was an adjunct professor at Nova, was the at one time the head of the behavioral science unit at Quantico. I can't remember the man's name, by the way, but I always thought that was interesting. I mean, if Kash Patel thinks that individuals who are out actually chasing the serial murderers and looking into domestic terror and so on are have time for all the administrative work, I mean, they don't. It has to be an enormous amount of support staff, and they're not police officers. Yeah, go ahead.
And Brooke, I think we should also point out that they hire a lot of lawyers, and that these lawyers are out in the field and in headquarters doing law work, which is really important to do. And that, this idea that they're just backbenchers somehow is a kind of a ridiculous idea. But I just thought maybe we could bring this in a different direction, because I was thinking about the pardon power again. And while I am against it, I don't understand where it comes from and why it exists. I do think it's important to note that Barack Obama pardoned 1,927 people, and that Joe Biden has pardoned 26 people. And that if there is a pardon power for the president, and there is, obviously, that he might want to start using it a little bit more freely in his last month in office to protect a lot more people than his son from this next regime that's coming in with Kash Patel at the FBI and whoever ends up being at the Attorney General.
Well, I'll be sure to send him a note and asking him to pardon us for any crimes possibly committed from here on in. And Brooklyn, that is Dr. Gregory Vesey was.
Yes. He was Dr. Marianne Markey's he was on her committee, on her dissertation committee.
Yeah, that was Greg. Yes. That was Greg Vesey. Yes. All right.
Yes. So again, so this is all part of Tara's question. And Tara, I need to understand what it is exactly that you're objecting to and what it is that you're asking. And so if you don't mind emailing, and Mark, if you see that email, please let me know, because I'm not clear what the objection actually is, as I detailed. So thank you again, everyone, for all your support over the past 3 years. And we're almost into our 4th year very soon. And we'll see you all again on the Nova Society.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Journal of Interdisciplinary Conflict Science. The JCIS is an open journal for upcoming scholars. The JCIS is currently accepting article submissions on an ongoing basis. The JCIS is a publication of Nova Works, a scholarly depository at Nova Southeastern University. A link to the journal is in our description. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, who is our editing partner, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. We'd also like to thank iHeart Radio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd also like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.